Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. There is a harsh reality, and that is that when economics meets politics, economics always wins. Because despite the wishes and desires of politicians to create this, make that, change something else, unless they've got the money, it's all just puffery and BS. And that's the problem that the SNP have got. They've got all these big pledges and promises, and look at us as we're offering this and offering that and offering something else. And they seem to think that if they call it free, it is. But of course it isn't. Everything has got a price. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And sometimes the bill is very, very expensive. More than perhaps they were expecting. And that's certainly the case with education. And when they come out with their pledges that, university education for Scots will always be free, that was the big claim until they had to force to admit university education for a few Scots will be free because we can't afford to let every Scot go on to university. We haven't got the money. But now it turns out it's even worse than that. Let's take a look. Right, the SNP government officials talked about axing free university tuition. But these discussions, of course, were kept deadly secret. They daren't let the cat out of that particular bag. After boasting so long, so hard about free education, the very fact that they were looking to end it because they couldn't afford it would have been rather humiliating, wouldn't it? Especially after all the big promises that they'd made. But of course, education isn't free. Just because the student themselves aren't paying for it doesn't mean it doesn't cost anything. It costs everyone. It costs the nation. It comes out of taxpayers' money. And of course, they've had to limit the numbers simply because the cost is so high that if they sent everyone to university, first of all, the country would be bankrupt, and secondly, the universities would fail because the amount of money that central government give to the universities for educating Scots pupils does not cover their expenses. They need to fill their places up with all the foreign students, predominantly Chinese at the moment. Seems to be a bit of an issue. But if they don't have the foreign students, they can't afford to educate Scotland students, and so the whole situation falls apart. It's not as though they've thought this through, is it? It's a typical SNP mess. Let's just announce something, because announcing things is cheap, and then let's just throw bits and bobs at it and hope something sticks and make it look good and we'll spin later. And that, of course, is what's happened. And the problem now is that if you are your average Scottish student who wants to go to university, chances are you're going to have to pay, because they've got these limited places. And if you're going to pay, then why pay to go to one in Scotland? If you're going to pay, you can go to one elsewhere in the country. And this is what happens. And of course, once they go, it's very rare they come back. And then problems arise from having this lack of skills, this brain drain. It's all joined up thinking, isn't it? Here's the thing. If you had heavily subsidised education, the pupils, say, paid £3,000, per year for their degree, much more affordable in terms of the nation having to fork it out. You could increase the spaces, and to be honest, £3,000 a year for a student isn't tremendously hard. And certainly over the course of a 3-year degree, it's still less than £10,000. It could be done on a very affordable loan basis. And also, if you're going to be saving for university, you can be saving from an early age and have a little tax-free sum, but a little tax-free savings scheme going on, something like that. It's all affordable if you plan it. And for the very poorest, of course, you could do what happened in my day. Grants. Do you remember them? I'm sure most of my viewers do. I look at the age demographic, and I'm sure most of my viewers will remember the days of university grants. Them days have long gone, haven't they? Anyway, Humza Yousaf and his SNP politicians are always quick to boast about free university tuition in Scotland. being a trade-off for living with higher taxes. But his officials discussed the policy behind closed doors in secret talks about whether it is still affordable. And I'll give you a breaking news. No, it's not. It never has been. It's just that they have to lie and spin and cover it and use the money from elsewhere. Where do you think? There's probably £2 billion black hole. They've announced $1 billion, then it turned out as $1.5 billion. They're still spinning it way over $2 billion. And it's exactly this sort of thing which is part of the problem. Anyway, Scottish Government officials sensationally discussed axing free university tuition last year, but the secretive SNP is refusing to disclose exactly what was talked about, and it's led to accusations of another cover-up by Humza Yousaf's nationalist administration. Of course they're not going to sit there and give people the information that will be used against them. You know, the very fact that it's leaked and it's now become a thing is very embarrassing for them. But it was always their big banner, wasn't it? Free education for all, which then got crossed out. Free education for some, which then got crossed out. Free education for a very limited number of Scottish pupils. And soon, free education for none. In the most recent taxpayer-funded Skexit planning paper launched on Monday, claimed that free tuition would be written into the constitution of a separate Scotland. And tell me, who's paying? Who's paying for this? Humza Yousaf has claimed that higher taxes in Scotland ensure that everybody can benefit from a free university place. That's a lie. Not everybody can benefit from it. You get stupid people can't benefit from it. Someone who's an old age pensioner can't benefit from it. What is this lie that everybody, some select few can benefit from it? However, this is at odds with the options discussed behind the secret scenes last year as the SNP ministers and officials grappled with a £1 billion black hole in the devolved finances. And that's the billion that they were admitting last year. Subsequently, they've admitted it was £1.5 billion, which means you know it's going to be guaranteed over £2 billion and rising. Let's face it, and rising. Under the Freedom of Information, the Scottish Daily Express asked whether the Nat's flagship policy and options for keeping it or scrapping it in the future had been discussed in the months before the Finance Secretary, Shona Robertson, unveiled her terrible budget in December. And in a major admission, the Scottish Government responded. In the light of the challenging fiscal context, the policy of universal free education was raised by officials. However, the options for targeting this policy were not pursued in light of ministers' very clear direction that the policy of free tuition would remain in place. In other words, we need to talk about Kevin. But what they're saying is it is a problem we need to talk about. Now, politically, it's dynamite, isn't it? The fact that they're even discussing it. Now, the fact that they decided not to press it, it's fine, I get it. I understand the politics, I understand the optics. But the very fact that this core tenet, this tentpole policy, this flagship policy was even discussed or raised is a stunning admission that they are in a far worse position than they're letting on. The response stated, we recognise that there is some public interest in the release in this case because they didn't want to release all the papers. There is some public interest in the release in this case because maintaining free university tuition in Scotland is a significant Scottish Government commitment. However, this is outweighed by the public interest in officials being able to discuss and consider policy options and for this to be informed by an ongoing free and frank exchange of views for the purposes of deliberation. How can it be ongoing free and frank if we don't know what's being said? They're basically saying the reason we're not telling you what went on in the meeting is that if we told you what went on in the meeting, you would use it against us. That's what they're saying. Anyway, the policy of free university tuition cost the Scottish Government nearly $1 billion a year, although it has led to a squeeze on places. Bada bing, I mentioned that at the beginning. Universities are increasingly reliant on students from the rest of the UK who must pay up to £9,000 a year, or those from overseas who can be hit with annual fees of $20,000 a year. And there's a lot of Chinese people going into Scottish universities. They're trying to attract them, St Andrews, Glasgow and so forth, because ka-ching, they're desperate for money. And of course, once they've got those places from the foreigners in, there's not many left for your average Scot. The Institute for Fiscal Studies think tank has warned the commitment to free education is becoming an increasingly difficult to sustain, given the financial pressures facing the Scottish Government, as well as Scottish universities and students. It is an absolute millstone round their neck. They know it, they can't do anything against it because they keep pushing it, but it is breaking them. Absolutely destructive for the universities, for the Scottish people, and ultimately for the economy, because it's money that's going in there isn't being invested elsewhere. And by limiting the places, it means people leave. And it's just bad all round. It's just a terrible, terrible thing all round. Now, of course, they're all saying that they're committed to free education. There's a picture. Look, the rocks will melt with the sun before I allow tuition fees to be imposed on Scotland's students. Well, it looks like those suns are starting to melt, because it's just now not affordable. Now, of course, that was a long time ago. Things have changed. There's been 2 different leaders since Alex Salmond's day, and it'll soon be no SNP. You got to wonder if in a couple of years' time, 2026, Labour government, will they abandon the free education policy? They may well do, but they'll probably do it as a thing saying, oh, it's going to be 3,000 a year, something like that, just to bring in some kind of sense and sanity into what is well meant but badly executed policy. Coming up. The SNP will fail by the death of 1,000 cuts, because it's everything they do, every policy they have is breaking, is unwinding, is being shown in some cases to be stupid or dangerous or iniquitous, or in the case of this, just plain unaffordable. And as each policy fails, and they're more and more exposed as the fools that they are, increasing numbers of their supporters will see that they've basically been fooled into voting for these people through lies, through promises that are little more than smoke and mirror. There's certainly no real substance to these people. They don't have an understanding of what is going on. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I do hope that's been entertaining. Please hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, leave a like, leave a comment, please share the video, and I will speak to you later. Bye.